Good morning. I actually do this a fair bit. I speak to audiences of various sizes, but never this early, and never after staying up so late. So this could either be the worst address I've ever done, or the best, depending on how it goes. So let's find out what'll happen together. Since you guys are a public radio audience, since you guys are supporters of WAD and Broadcasting Atlanta, there's too many initials for me to keep straight this morning. I thought what I would do is I'd tell you a little bit about how somebody like me, who had absolutely no qualifications to be doing this, came to be doing this, and how the show was launched. And maybe along the way, tell you something about how public radio shows come to be. And then obviously I'll be happy to take your questions. As was said, I had a very eclectic and strange career. I grew up in suburban New Jersey, as many of you have heard me on the radio show mention, with varying degrees of bitterness. And went off to college, and came out of college, and I was going to change the world somehow. I was going to be, depending on the day, my chosen daydream was either winning the Pulitzer, or maybe winning an Oscar, but only for classy movies. Or maybe, go right to the Nobel. I didn't know what I was going to do. And after kicking around for a while and doing some of the things you've heard, and a few others as well. By the way, the Michael Jackson video was not Thriller. Everybody assumes, you say, oh, I was in a Michael Jackson video. They say, oh, you were a zombie. No, I was not a zombie. I wasn't actually anything, but that's another story I'll tell you later. And in 1997, I found myself living in New York City as a playwright. I had been writing plays and screenplays for some time and was getting some success, meaning that I was actually making an income, which is hard to do. And living there in Brooklyn, New York, around the time we're discussing, my wife was pregnant with our first child, who is now almost 12. Talk about time flying by. And writing away, and one day I got a phone call. And the phone call was from a friend of mine. He said, I know somebody at public radio, NPR, who they're putting together a new show. They're looking for funny people who read a lot of newspapers. And I thought of you, said my friend. Would you be interested? Now, pause that moment for a second. Freeze frame it, I was, and to a great extent in terms of my own sensibility, a writer. And I still am, And being a writer, there is nothing more important to me, nothing more precious to me, nothing more central to my focus than how and for how long I'm going to procrastinate. The things that I do instead of writing are amazing. In fact, and this is a true story, in college it got to be such a problem because you have these deadlines in college that, and I was so good at distracting myself with other things that I decided that I could only get a certain paper done if I made sure there was nothing to distract me. So I went into the library and I found a graduate student's carrel, because they ran out these carols and they put their books in it, that the guy was, or the woman for all I know, was studying German. And I'm like, well, this is great because all the books are in German. There'll be nothing for me to distract myself with. I swear to you, within 10 minutes, I was trying to teach myself German. So that's who I am. And it's relevant because my primary method of procrastination was listening to public radio. I would go, I can't do my work. I need to listen to this All Things Considered report that I heard the first time it was broadcast. But I might pick up some nuances. And more to the point, and slightly more seriously, a writer is a solitary existence. Or it should be. And there were many days, particularly before I was married, when the only people I would hear in the course of a day would be people on public radio in the various cities where I was living during that time. And as you know, because you're all supporters and listeners, you end up getting a very sort of personal relationship with people you hear on the radio. You feel like you know them. Sometimes I would talk back to them. They couldn't hear me, but I felt that if they could, they would be pleased with what I had to say. And I say all this to indicate that just like you, I was sort of part of this larger community, family of the air, even if they didn't know about me. And getting back to that moment of getting that phone call, it was sort of an invitation to, come in from outside. It was very exciting to me to have the opportunity to be on public radio, because I was, more than anything, and this is my only qualification to be doing this, a fan. So, freeze frame, go back to the freeze frame, unfreeze it, I go, yes, that would be great. And so, my name was passed in, and I get a phone call from a gentleman named David Green. And he says, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do these auditions. We're going to do these trial runs. So I got on the phone, told my wife, I said, leave me alone. This is important. This is my chance to be in public radio. And I sat in my office, and we did a quiz on the phone. They set up these conference calls. There's a whole bunches of people. Every time I do it, it'd be somebody else. They'd be trying different people as host. They'd be trying different people as announcer, the role that Carl was in. Obviously, lots of different people. And at the end of the process, at the end of mid to end of 1997, they told me that I would be one of the panelists. So I was hired. I think if you can use that word in relation to the amount of pay that I got. I was asked to donate my time to this new show, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Now, I should also back up a little bit, so you can also see that I have a problem with digression, and explain where Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me came from. A lot of people say, oh, did you invent the show? And I was like, and I've gotten to the point where I really should just say, yes, I did. In college, I created my own major, game show studies. When I was a child, I used to create little game show sets with my stuffed animals and ask questions. No, none of this was true. In fact, to this day, it kind of bothers me that I host a game show. I have a friend of mine who says, oh, you're a game show host. That's so cool. I'm like, no, I'm not. I made a Wink Martindale joke last night. I don't know if you heard that. I'm self-conscious about it. At any rate, no, the story is much more cold and corporate, if you will, insofar as public radio ever gets cold and corporate. You all are public radio listeners. You all are the most important public radio listeners. I can say that because you're sitting here. And because you are devoted public radio listeners, I can make a prediction about your behavior based on studies. And the general prediction is that you listen to Morning Edition every day. If you can at work, you listen to it all day. I don't know what the daytime schedule is, but it probably involves Diane Rehm. It might involve Terry Gross. It might involve various daytime shows, Talk of the Nation, of course. Then you get to the evening and you listen to All Things Considered, probably on your way home from work or maybe while you're preparing dinner. And you do that every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday morning you get up. Now, prior to Wait, Wait, you listen to Scott Simon, immensely popular guy. You listen to Car Talk. And then, in general, you turn it off and you don't come back till Monday. In general. Now, there are people, of course, who tune in for Garrison Keillor, and there are people who tune in for the Sunday morning shows, Leanne Hansen, and there are people who tune in for the All Things Considered. But the numbers go down, and the people show up in spots. They don't. This is my imitation of a graph, but it's sort of like listener, 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 Saturday morning, and then it's like here until Monday, which starts going up again. So NPR felt that we need to do something to keep those listeners, you folks, listening to the radio for another hour. And it should be something that's not news, because there's already a lot of news. There's All Things Considered Saturday and Sunday, and again Sunday morning. It shouldn't be news, it should be entertainment, but it should be entertainment for people who listen to a lot of news. Y'all. How about a news quiz? Hey, that's a good idea. And that's where it began. So they went to Doug Berman, producer of Car Talk, and they said to him, let's produce a news quiz. And apparently, I wasn't aware of any of this. By the time I got that phone call in 1997, they had been trying to develop it for years. They had tried different things. They had tried different arrangements. They had tried doing it in front of a live audience, and that failed. They decided to throw out that idea. But finally, they had arrived at a model they wanted to try. They wanted to do it based in a studio, host in a studio connected to panelists in various other studios around the country. That way you could rely on a national talent pool. You didn't have to get everybody in one city. People calling in. They decided that Carl Castle should be a part of it relatively early in the process. And that's what they tried to do, and that was the model that they proceeded with, and they went on the air with. They got a grant. And so, January 1998, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me went on the air January 3rd for the first time on about 8 or 9 radio stations, including Chicago, where it was based, not Atlanta, a few others. And let me say, in the privacy of this theater, that it was bad. I appeared on that show, again, as a panelist. It was like, and now joining us as well, Peter Sagal from Brooklyn, New York. Hello. And it was bad. And there is some argument now, as we look back, about how bad it was, how much trouble it was in. I say it was really bad. And you know, I feel I can say this with some, you know, honesty and humility, because I was a part of it. You know, I was not like saying, you guys sucked. It was like, we sucked. And I remember listening to it with my wife. We had to listen via the internet to the station in Philadelphia because New York City wasn't broadcasting it. And I remember turning it off and going, yeah, you know, I wouldn't listen to this if I wasn't on it. But at any rate, however bad it was, Doug Berman, who's still the executive producer, thinks, oh, it wasn't so bad. At any rate, they felt that they needed to make some changes, and they decided one of the problems, not by any means the only problem, but one of the problems was the host of the show. Some gentleman who had a tremendous resume and seemed perfect for the gig, but it wasn't working out. And they decided that they needed to make a change, and make a change rather quickly. And somebody, Berman says it was him, I don't necessarily believe him, said, this Sagal guy seems hostish. I probably lost my chance because there's so much bitterness now between everybody. They'll never say anything nice about me, but I'm curious as to know what it was about me that they thought I could do it. But so I got this phone call. And I remind you all that, you know, I had been a huge public radio fan. And they said to me, Doug, or rather the producer David said to me, he said, well, what would you think about trying to host the show? And again, you guys are all public radio fans. You've probably been public radio fans for a long time. Imagine yourself getting that call. Would you like to host your own show? Again, with no qualifications. No experience. To this day, I don't know what button makes it possible for you to hear my voice. I just, you know. And I said, as anybody would, okay. It also required moving to Chicago, which for various personal reasons turned out to be a really good idea. So off we went. Myself, my wife, and at that point my very young daughter, to Chicago. And in May of 1998, the show began with me saying to an audience, because one of the rules in radio is you never tell the audience about like backstage shenanigans unless you have to. So basically I said, well, in case and Carl Castle said, and here's your host, Peter Sagal. And I said, well, if anybody was wondering what you win, if you win the quiz, now you know. And then I went on with the show. And thus we began, again, on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And again, the history is in dispute, but this is my version and I'm sticking to it. That the show was in trouble. Public radio, as you may or may not know, is a pretty conservative institution. And that may surprise you. But I don't mean conservative that way. We're all communists. What I mean is solidarity. What I mean is that it changes slowly. And there are reasons that it changes slowly. The primary reason, there are two reasons in my view. There's sort of a structural reason and there's a psychological reason. The structural reason is that, as you may or may not know, NPR is not like ABC or NBC. It's not a network. It is a company that produces programming. Every station, WABE here, WBEZ in Chicago, WNYC, on and on and on, are independently operated and make independent decisions about what they're going to broadcast. So if you're ABC, you say, boom, we're going to broadcast Desperate Housewives. Everybody broadcasts Desperate Housewives, and everybody says yes, they have no choice. Public radio, NPR says, we have a new show. It's called Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Would you like to broadcast it? Maybe? Please? And every individual station makes their own decision. Yes, maybe we will. Yes, maybe we won't. And in those early years, the answer was almost always no. No, we won't. Sorry. And the reason, in addition to us being bad, that the response was no so often was the psychological conservatism. And that is, and this is something I had to learn, among the many things I had to learn. For example, like this device makes my voice audible. I didn't know that. I had been a playwright. And in theater, the worst sin you can commit is repeating yourself. You know, you do something, people like it, well, God damn it, you can't do the same thing the next time because then you're stuck in a rut, right? So you constantly have to make things new to the extent that you can. Radio, and I had to learn this again, it had to be told to me explicitly, is very much the opposite. Radio is about familiarity. Radio is about the same. Being the same. Being what, when people push whatever button it is on their car, radio, or maybe even at home now, they want to hear what they expect. Talk about Rush Limbaugh, who's among his other qualities is a tremendously talented radio entertainer. And the great thing about Rush Limbaugh is Rush Limbaugh can be the same every day. Every day you turn into Rush Limbaugh, and those who like Rush Limbaugh get Rush Limbaugh, exactly what they expect. And he plays that role brilliantly, and he manages to do it without ever seeming, obviously, to repeat himself. Every day he is the same in a new way. That's really hard. So what that means for people who, you know, like the people here who need to run this place, is that their audience expects what they've already gotten. And if they don't get it, they're going to be mad. If they don't get their opera, if they don't get their Garrison Keillor, if they don't get their Michael Feldman, if they don't get whatever at the time when they expect it, they're going to be upset. And so radio programmers have an obligation to make sure that people get the product that they want. We had to convince them, one by one by one by one by one, that your audience will actually, no matter how many pitchforks and burning torches they bring to your station, when you announce it, eventually they're going to be happier with us. That's hard to do. It's hard to convince somebody. In fact, there was one instance where somebody put us on the air. They got such a huge, angry outburst from the people supporting, I think it was an opera show that we had supported, that they actually backed down and took us off the air again. You know. So we had to go out there, and again, one by one, and convince stations to do it. And we weren't succeeding at first. Like I said, at this point we were maybe up to 15 or 20 stations. And keep in mind, we were doing this with the full support of NPR, the brand in public radio programming. And it was still very difficult. I can't imagine what it's like if you don't have that. If you don't have, you know, the imprimatur of NPR. There are a lot of programmers who have great ideas for radio shows, and it's impossible, you know, to convince somebody to take off this beloved show that's been on for years and put you on. And we made this decision, which I remember quite vividly. We sat around and we said, well, here we are, we have a chance to redo this, we have a chance to remake this show. What are we going to do? We can make it a serious quiz in which people have a chance to, listeners that is, to indulge in what our demographic studies showed was the primary hobby of public radio listeners, which is feeling smug. By asking serious questions about the news and letting them answer it and feeling superior because they knew the questions. Or we can just completely blow off the idea of a serious quiz and have as good a time as possible. And I'll let you guess as to which we chose. And what again, this is my memory. We didn't know if we would continue past a given week. We had been launched along with another new show from NPR called Anthem. They lasted a year before they were finally canceled. And so there we were, you know. Could happen to us, the axe could fall. So let's just enjoy ourselves. You know, I think there's a famous line from the movie Animal House, they're going to get us no matter what we do, so we might as well have a good time. And that's how I felt about it. And we just started messing around. I wouldn't say messing around, but it's early morning and you're a polite audience. And what we found was that and this remains true to this day, I said this to Rick Sanchez right before we went on stage, the more fun we have with each other doing what amuses us, the more fun our audience has. And what we found is the great advantage of public radio, and this is why it's unique and why people leave other kinds of broadcasting and come to public radio, why it thrives when other kinds of media are struggling, is that if you're in public radio, you can assume that the audience is as smart as you are. However smart you are. You never have to say to yourself, well, that's a pretty clever, funny idea, but the audience... No, the audience is, if anything, more informed than you are. So you can you can do stuff, which is the secret to our success. People say, well, how do you do it? Well, we just do stuff that makes us laugh. We sit around, if some of the people from the station were watching our rehearsal, and we just amuse ourselves. If something makes us laugh, it's good. If it doesn't, we get rid of it. And that's how we do the show. What we find funny, what I find funny. And it turns out that my only qualification for doing this show, being a public radio nerd myself, is really the most important one, since I'm doing stuff that makes public radio nerds happy. And it turns out you're all like me, you know? And therefore you're happy too. Let me tell you one last thing, and then I'll take your questions. During those years, those first years, 98, 99, which we were really transforming the show. It seems like almost every week we were trying something new. Like, oh, this week we're going to do this limerick game, and next week we're going to try this thing. One of the first things we did after I became the host was we invented Who's Carl. Adam Felber and I came up with that on a subway platform in New York City. Because Titanic had just been out, and we were like, wouldn't it be great if, like, Carl, said, just like Kate Winslet in Titanic, "Put your hands on me, Jack." And we thought that was very funny. And we started having Carl do imitations, and it proceeded. And it is funny, particularly to Jack. But I have to tell you that you may remember me mentioning earlier that I had all these ambitions to win that Pulitzer and or Oscar and or Nobel, and it seemed, how best can I put this? It seemed beneath me. This public radio japery. And I became friends with Ira Glass, and I saw the amazing and difficult and serious work that he was doing in This American Life, and I became friends with NPR News and Scott Simon. That was, by the way, that's a great side benefit of my life, is that I get to be friends with the people who I used just to imagine being friends with. And he'd be off to Sarajevo or wherever doing serious news, and there I was making dumb jokes about Britney Spears, or for the first year of our show, Monica Lewinsky. And I would feel, since I'm plagued by self-doubt, I'd be like, oh, geez, is this really what I want to be doing? What happened to my great American drama? And then, and this is a charming and fun note to end on, but I will, September 11th happened. And it's hard to remember from this date, not what happened, we remember that, but how we felt about it. Emotional memories are harder to hold on to. And just to remind you, I felt that we would never laugh about the news again. There's nobody more useless in the world than somebody who makes jokes at the expense of the news on the day after 9/11. How can you possibly ever laugh at this stuff again? And we honestly thought maybe our show would be canceled. Certainly it was canceled for a week. They didn't broadcast anything but news. No car talk, no wait. But then the next week, 9/11 was a Tuesday, and then came the weekend, we didn't do a show, and now it's the next week, and we have to sit down and talk about how we're going to do a show. And we talked about, what are we going to do? Maybe we should just do a little, instead of talking about the week's news, because the week's news is so horrible with the smoldering wreckage there, maybe we'll do, a show just about history topics or other kinds of trivia. And we're like, no, we do what we do. At that time, our audience was in the hundreds of thousands. Now it's 3 million. Let's just do it. Let's just do what we do, And we did it. We did a show. And it wasn't the best show that we've ever done, by far, but we did it. We made jokes. I remember one of the things we did was we joked about a mob boss in prison who offered to loan his personal garbage compactor machine to the city of New York to help in the cleanup, We're like, as long as you didn't ask too closely what it would have been used for, it'd be fine. We were making jokes like that. Again, not great jokes. But we, did the show, and then we got this tremendous response. It seemed as if every one of those 100,000 listeners wrote to us, although that can't be true. And they told us, thank you so much. Most of them did. A few were like, no, it was too soon, you shouldn't have done it. But most of them were like, thank you so much, because the news has been so bleak, and I have been listening to the news with such a sense of obligation. It was such a pleasure to be given permission to relax and to laugh and to loosen up a little bit for an hour, and we really needed that. Thank you so much. And that has been the consistent response that we have gotten, because since 2001, a long time ago now, the news has often been, not so good. And the consistent response, now that we do the show live in front of an audience every week, I get to meet people every week, and they almost always say the same thing. They say, thank you for your hour a week where we get to relax, where we get to make a joke, where we get to stop being so serious. We're sort of like this pressure valve, We are sort of, I often think of this, that according to legend, back in medieval times, there was one day a year, the festival day, where everything got turned upside down, where the fool became the king and the king became the fool, and the rules were broken, and you didn't have to obey all the strictures of life that you otherwise had to do in medieval life. And I think of our show as sort of the festival hour of public radio, where we are goofy and sophomoric and stupid and irreverent and disrespectful and mean and juvenile. Did I stress that enough? And we get to, like to say, we get to say the things on the radio that most people just shout at the radio. And that's not bad, I mean, it's not the Pulitzer Prize, and it's not an Oscar, and I don't think they'll ever give me a Nobel for it, but it's not a bad way to earn a living, to give people this opportunity. So, and to indulge in it myself, because I'm out there first saying the rude and stupid things and enjoying them. So, just in closing, let me just say to you, thank you for the opportunity to let me do this, because in public radio, for all the reasons I've mentioned, the decisions don't get made from the top down. They get made from the bottom up. They get made from the listeners who choose what to listen to, from donors who donate and support, from station managers who, responding to the listeners and the donors, make their decisions. So frankly, if it weren't for the fact that you, the people in this room, listened to the show and enjoyed the show and supported the station that broadcast the show, I wouldn't be able to get to do it. So thank you all very much. I really like my job. Thank you for having me do it. And with that, I'll be happy to take your questions. Well, actually, I don't know. I know some people weren't there. After every performance, what we do is we take 3 or 4 minutes and we go back and we redo some statements, some moments from the show. Usually about a dozen or less. Last night wasn't so bad. And it really is not so much about mistakes I made. I made a lot. That's not so much the issue. I mean, when I mispronounce something or say something, that sometimes happens. It's about editing. When the show began, we were in a studio. We did it in a connected studios, and one of the reasons we did that was to make it easier to edit. Doug Berman, our executive producer, aforementioned, is a great believer in editing. He believes that his statement is you take talented people, you let them do what they do best, and then you edit the hell out of them. Car Talk, for example. Not live. And so our show is edited. And one of the reasons that we waited too long, in my view, to do it in front of a live audience where it should naturally be was because a live hall with an audience is much more difficult to edit. And this is why. You can do amazing things in editing audio these days. If you were listening to me speak right now, you could edit, you could connect the first part of a word I'm saying to the second part of another word, and it would be seamless. What you can't do is you can't separate out sounds. If I'm speaking and the audience is laughing, you can't separate my speaking from the audience laughing. So what we were doing last night for the most part was creating clean transitions. When I say something, as we say, in the clear with no other sound, it means you can go to me saying that and then move on to another segment without hearing, as you might otherwise, audience laughter suddenly end in an abrupt way. One of the things that our editors take pride in is that you, the audience, can never hear the edits. When you're watching a movie, you see the edit. Boom, shot up. And you do it so often you don't even notice. In radio, you notice if there's an edit. And so we try to, so those are all about to recover. Also, sometimes it's for content. So for example, last night, Rick Sanchez was our guest, and he launched into, he was talking about being Cuban, and he started doing a Ricky Ricardo impersonation. Oh, Lucy, he said. And I said something to the effect of, speaking of, that Ricky Ricardo impersonation you came by naturally. You were born in Cuba, right? Well, my editors were like, we're not going to broadcast him doing a Ricky Ricardo impersonation, So I had to retake that question, not mentioning the stuff that they knew they were going to cut. So the editors, the producers are listening to the show. They're making notes. So we're going to keep that. We're going to keep that. We're going to get rid of that. To get rid of that, we need to make sure that Peter introduces it, the next thing, cleanly. That's what that's about. So when you listen tomorrow, as I hope you will, you'll hear a show that sounds utterly seamless, sounds live, sounds like it all just happened the way you heard it, and of course, it's a lie. Yes, sir. I am a runner, and I have gotten various plaudits in my life and honors, but nothing mattered to me more, ever, than being featured in the I'm a Runner column at the back of Runner's World. This is the running magazine that I guess is the biggest one. At the back page of each magazine, there's a little feature of some well-known person who runs. In fact, that Newsweek cover of Sarah Palin about a month ago that everybody was talking about, that photograph of her standing there in her shorts, holding her BlackBerry, was originally taken for her I'm a Runner profile. She and I have this in common. So they profiled me, and I was utterly thrilled because, like all geeky intellectuals, I really want to be known for my athletic prowess. I just want to be a dumb jock, please. And during the interview, I complained, facetiously, I said, the only problem with running is your hobby is there's not enough to buy. Because everybody knows that the reason you pursue a hobby is to go shopping, right? That's why everybody golfs, right? Because you can buy all this stuff, or ski, or any other things. But running, what are you going to buy? You buy sneakers, you buy shorts, you buy a T-shirt, you're done, you know? And the editor-in-chief of Runner's World, David Willey, called me up and said, okay, how about you become our gear columnist? And you can test all this stuff out. So I was like, that's great! So I've had a chance to test all this weird stuff, like these toe shoes that look like gloves for your feet, and various electronic stuff, and it's been fun, and I'll continue doing it. It's been really fun. My rule is I don't talk about running because nothing is more boring than someone talking about running. But it turns out that if other people are running, they're all very interested, so I've really enjoyed that, and I'll be doing more of it, I hope. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes? Well, we have a producer these days. His name is Ian Shillog. He was there last night, whose primary job, or it's his job to go out and get them. And basically you work the phones. There are sort of three main ways. The first way is, there's a publicity industrial complex that operates all the time. An author or a celebrity is out there promoting a movie or a book. You connect with them. Who do you got coming up? Who's on book tour? Oh, this movie's coming out. Can we get the actor? Can we get the director? Yeah, and everybody's interested in sort of. So we're just connected to that. We know publicists.
Is there reluctance?
Is there reluctance? Less and less as time goes on, which is one of the, sort of moving, I'll sort of get to that in the third place. The second part is we just cold call. We say, hey, we're coming to your city. Hey, we're really interested in this. Can we get this person in the show? We do a lot of that.
Is it because of you?
Is it because, are you talking about the reluctance? The third is we're actually getting calls these days from people who want to be on the show, which is really fun. Somebody just goes, hey, I have a client who really wants to be on the show. People come up and want, and this is gratifying. But mainly, there is a reluctance. The quiz freaks some people out. I don't know if you heard this, but on Talk of the Nation on Monday, they did a tribute to Carl Castle, who, as you know, is leaving the newscast, not our show, but the newscast. And one of the people that had on the air was Katie Couric, who was an intern for Carl back when that term was completely innocent, years ago in the 70s when Carl was on a news station in Virginia. And Carl took the opportunity to invite her to be our guest on the show on live radio. And Katie demurred a little bit. Oh, I don't know. The whole question thing. And, she might have been, the equivalent of I'll be washing my hair that morning. But it's true. We've had people who would love to be in the show, who'd be great to be in the show, but they just don't like the idea of being asked questions. It makes them nervous. And we assure people, we say, it doesn't matter. It's just for fun. Nobody cares. And yet they just get nervous about it. So I think that's an obstacle. Plus, and I think this is something we've dealt with a lot. There have been a couple of instances of people saying things on our show that were kind of dumb, that got them attention. Most famously, Dana Perino was on our show, and I think it was the end of '08, and she was the White House press spokesman, lovely woman. And she said in a kind of, I thought at the time, charming and funny, self-deprecating way, we were joking about how young she was, she's still in her 30s, And she said, you know, it's funny sometimes, like somebody asked me about the Cuban Missile Crisis and I didn't know what it was. And I had to go and say to my husband, what's the Cuban Missile Crisis? Was that about missiles? And her husband was like, this is Katie talking. And my husband was like, oh, not Katie, excuse me. Oh, Dana. That got picked up. Oh, Dana Perino, Bush White House spokesman, doesn't know who the White House, doesn't know the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it was this big thing for like a week in the blogs. What an idiot, what a fool, you know. And I defended her. I was like, come on. She was trying to be charming and humble. Just leave her alone. But when that happens on occasion, people, even though we assure them otherwise, see our show as someplace where they may not come off looking good, even though that's never our intent. So, anyway. Chris Paul. God, that was fun. Chris Paul, as you know, hugely talented basketball player, and we were at Wake Forest University doing a show a couple years ago when he was back at Wake Forest doing an annual charity event that he does, because he's from there, he's from the community. And he was so incredibly gracious and kind. I mean, it was weird. He's like this huge NBA star, although he was in his rookie season. Maybe he's gotten into the lifestyle more. But I mean, he's just a very nice young man standing there in a sweater, slacks, standing with one guy, no entourage, you know. And he just was like incredibly kind and humble. And this is the great thing about Chris Paul. He was, first of all, you know, I do public performance, and I know people who can do it, and I know people who can. He was so charming. We had an audience about the size last night, a couple thousand people. He had them in the palm of his hand, not just because he was famous, but because he was open and honest and spoke so well and with such humor. I was hugely impressed with him. But this is what made me so happy. A little while later, Sports Illustrated did one of their interviews with him, and they did one of those one-page things, and they asked him all these questions. And they want to hear about his lifestyle, they want to hear about other players, they want to hear about his game. He wanted to talk about us. And they told me, said, yeah, he kind of insisted. He said, yeah, you tell him I was on Wait, Don't Tell Me, and I won. So, no, you must be back in the show, man, anytime you want. You know him, let him know. He was great. We got to see him, he gave us some tickets, and we got to see him play. Oh, my God. He is something. He is something. Yes. What does my daughter think of the show, and do we have a teen demographic? I'll answer the second question first. We do have a lot of young kids who like the show. They're dorky, but so was I when I was there. So it's fine. Young woman in the back goes, yeah. You're all dorks. But yeah, we get sometimes kids as young as 8 or 9 to come to see the show. More often like 11 or 12 or 13. And it's great. I love it. You know, I love it. And a lot of parents brought, and they say, oh, you know, my kid made me come. And sometimes people say, well, it's because of you that my kid follows the news, so thank you. My daughters, you know, it's a little different because it's me. You know, it's their dad. And for a while, and there's also the aspect, oh, this is the reason I'm not home on Thursday nights, and this is the reason why I'm away so much, so there's a certain degree of resentment. Then they're like, you know, there's a lot of Saturday mornings in my home where I turn on myself on the radio, and they're like, do we have to listen to this? We have a rule in the Sagal household. If you are on the radio, you get to listen to it. But I got to tell you, my now almost 12-year-old, who's turning into a teenager before my eyes, is just terrifying. So we did the show in Carnegie Hall, and the whole family came. So there I was. It was really fun. I came out in Carnegie Hall, and there's, you know, 2,600 people filling Carnegie Hall, and right there in the front are my wife and my 3 kids. And that eldest daughter, who, like I said, is turning into a teenager, came up to me afterwards. She said, you know, Papa, she said, I give you a hard time, but this was pretty cool. So that was very nice. Now she's giving me a hard time again. Yes, sir. Like, well, basically, you know, people say, is this a full-time job? And then I punch them. And then I stand over their bleeding forms, and I say, well, actually it is. Because what I tell them is, like, last night we taped, if you sort of added them all up in all their various forms, maybe 15, 20 news items, right? All told. Not counting just the basic headlines that you can just compile in a day that we do at the end of the show. So let's say 15 stories over the course of the show. For each one of those 15 that we recorded, and only about 8 or 9 will be broadcast, for each one of the 15 that we recorded, we wrote up and discussed, say, for each of them, say 5 to 1. And then for each of the 5 that we discussed or wrote up, we read 100. You know, we're constantly reading news. We're constantly scanning the internet. We're constantly going to sort of each have our own little techniques. I have certain places I go. I subscribe to blogs that point out funny stories. One of my focus is always on the main stories of the week, because I'm always thinking, oh my God, you know, this week President Obama accepted his Nobel Prize. What are we going to say about it? because I think that people have an expectation that we'll say something. So I spend most of my time just reading the news and reading the analysis and trying to find out what's going on and what are people saying, what's going on, so that at the top of the show we can be aggressive and funny and informed about the main news of the week. A lot of my colleagues spend most of their time looking for those obscure stories. We have a producer in our show named Eva Walchover who every day just starts pumping out here's a little cow looking at this, here's the odd thing, here's this. She's just very, very good at finding those. And every day at 2 or 3 o'clock our time, we sit down, we have a list of all the stories, we say, what's funny? What do we think is funny? What do we think the panelists will think is funny? What will give us an opportunity? What's unusual? What have we done before? You know, a lot of times things happen again and again and again, like every week. Some guy is caught smuggling lizards in his pants. We're going to do that again? What's the bar? You know? And sometimes we have to budget. You know, it's like, want to talk about Sarah Palin again this week? Well, we did last week. Is it worth it? Is it like, it was really worth going back to Sarah Palin? I don't know. You think? You know, should we save it? We know she's going to do something stupid next week. Should we save it? So, but basically, a lot of staring at computers is what we do. Yes, sir.
Actual show.
Well, it's again not that exciting to watch, but basically what we do is, as I said, I'll start describing the week. Monday, we're starting to talk about what we're going to do. We're starting looking at listener mail. We're starting to think about who the guest is, what we might ask that guest. Tuesday, we try to get that locked down. We're looking at stories. By 3 o'clock on Tuesday, we have a list maybe of 100 news stories that have made the list. Many didn't, but we're going to talk about these. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? Wednesday, we start writing. So I'll come in on Wednesday and I'll start writing jokes about, and other people will as well. I'll start writing jokes about the top of the news. Other people will start writing up some of the other stories. What can we be funny about? What, make jokes. Because it's not just, we don't just try to lay it out there. We try to hit it with some spin. Wednesday, we read out that material. We argue. Oh, that was funny. That wasn't funny at all. That was deadly. That was awful. We get mad at each other. What do you mean you didn't like that? That was funny. Well, I get it. And Thursday, we come in. We write the whole script. We use the material that we liked from the day before. Thursday at about 3 or 4 o'clock, we do a read through of the show. In our offices, if we're at home, on the stage at the theater, if we're at the theater, we do a read through of the show. We argue, we talk. That was good. No, we need more material. Blah blah blah. Like last night, we started the show with the Climate Gate. We had a whole bunch of material, and then we had some other material. We decided the second bunch of material was better than the first bunch of material, so we decided to switch that around, add something else. Oh, there's another aspect of the story that's funny. Let's do that. Oh, blah blah blah. We finish that, we go back, we sit down, we rewrite based on the notes, which are based on our ideas, based on what's good. Sometimes we'll just make something up. Oh my God, what's really funny? We'll throw something in. And then we gobble some dinner, we run up and we do it. And then on Fridays, even as I'm here, they're probably not awake yet, but they're going to get up, the editors of the show are going to get up and take all that we recorded, edit it down to 54 minutes, whatever it is, and put it on the computers for stations to download.
What's the improv level?
The improv level is fairly high. One of the ironies of our show is that we spend a lot of time preparing so that we can be spontaneous, which is somewhat contradictory, but it's important because we have found, and I need to be careful because I said this to a newspaper once and I said it in such a way to make my colleagues feel bad. Let's say, take Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart, who's brilliant, has a huge staff of writers and a tremendous amount of producers who can shape material that they're going to do really well. Really well. It's so sharp. It's so sharp. But it's mostly him talking. We don't have those kinds of resources. We don't have 10 professional comedy writers feeding jokes. We don't have 10 videographers scanning material to do graphics on. What we have is we have something that sounds and really is much more spontaneous and live than Stewart or Colbert or the other people who do what we do. And I think that the appeal of our show is that it sounds spontaneous. It sounds like something is happening right there. So we do all that writing that I just described. And then what we hope will happen is something even funnier will happen spontaneously. What we want it to sound like is we want it to sound like the panelists and I are responding to each other in the moment spontaneously. And we often are. So, a lot. All of the writing that I discussed is entirely for me and for Carl. The panelists, with the exception of their bluff stories, never say anything from a piece of paper. It's all spontaneous. Good or bad, but it's all real. So, and we try to encourage that from them. And from myself, a lot of times, some of the best things I'll say in the show are things I just thought up on the spot. So, yes?
How much in advance do the panelists have to write their
Well, we give it to them at least the day before, but they often show up at the office and they don't write it. I mean, they're like, oh, I got to write it. So they often end up writing it at the last minute.
They know the topic.
They know the topic a day before, and then they get around to it maybe. So.
Are they procrastinators?
How horrible. Yes, sir. The answer to the second question is almost always. I mean, it's just a lot of fun to do. It really is. I can't think of a show where something went so wrong that we just stopped having fun. It's just as fun. It really is. We're joking around. We're making fun. I'm genuinely enjoying myself. And that's, I think, the appeal of the show. It sounds like, I mean, I think, I'll get to your other question in a second, but the big change in our show was when we went from doing the show mostly in the studio to doing it always in front of an audience. And the difference is now it sounds like something really fun is happening in this room. And if you listen to the radio, you can be part of it. That's the appeal. And it's true. It has to be true. We can't fake that. So yes, we're all having a good time. The answer to your first question is, did I write comedy? The answer is almost never. I wrote very serious plays that had jokes in them. But like I said, I wanted to win the Pulitzer Prize. I wanted to write plays that addressed the human condition. But what would happen is that I would be writing these plays, and I would put in jokes constantly because I'm insecure. And what I have found is that if people are laughing, they're paying attention. And so I would put in jokes. Plus, I've been to a lot of bad theater in my life, as I'm sure you all have. And God, if somebody's going to spend that much money and spend 2 hours sitting in the dark, listening to you pontificate through the mouths of fictional characters, the least you could do is give them some laughs every now and then. And so, I talk to people who, like Jimmy Kimmel, for example, who was a guest on our show. And he's like, all I ever wanted to do was be a comedian. That's it. Comedy was my thing. I was a comedy nerd. I listened to comedy routines. And all I wanted to do was be a comic. And I was like, no. And I didn't want to be a comic. I wanted to be Arthur Miller. And I think I'm luckier ending up being a comic than Arthur Miller. So, yes?
Could you estimate the number of people that have Carl Castle's?
Somebody counted it up. It's got to be in the thousands by now, because we've been doing it for almost 12 years. January will be our 12th anniversary. And he gives about, 4 away a week? 4 away a week. 50 weeks a year, more or less. That's a lot of answering machine messages. So, a lot. Although, to this day, I've never called anyone randomly. Has anybody called anybody not expecting it and heard Carl Castle? You have. There you are. So, it does exist. Besides, who has answering machines these days? A lot of people just get the CD and they put it on their shelf. They don't know what to do with it. Yes, sir. Some of them have lasted from the very beginning. We have a very stable group. Charlie and Roy were 2 of the original panelists. Amy had been on the original panel but then left for a long time. She came back about 5 years ago. Our show is really difficult to do because you have to be yourself in a very artificial environment. It's kind of hard to work new people in. You can get people who are very, very informed but aren't funny. You can get people who are very, very funny but aren't spontaneous. You can get people who are very, very spontaneous but say things you don't want them to say. You can get people who have all the qualities. They're funny, they're informed, they're spontaneous, but they can't make it work in that really weird context in which we do things. And so it's very, very rare that we add new people, although we're trying, because we think that that's something, we do have to keep it fresh in the context of being the same every week, and that's one of the things we want to do is bring some new voices in. And we're confident enough with our abilities and the other people we've got that we can put somebody new in and not be afraid that they'll mess it up. I think I should take one more and then be done. Houston, Texas in February, and these days we go to where the audiences are, where we can fill big halls like we did last night, because it's fun and profitable. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for